Hello and welcome to Weird Around Illinois. Today we're going to discuss a few UFO sightings, actually a few massive UFO sightings that took place in Tinley Park. You may recall from a previous video that Tinley Park, Illinois was very high on our list of cities with the most UFO sightings in Illinois. It turns out most of these reports in Tinley Park came from one cluster of incidents called the Tinley Park Lights. So let's talk about that and let's get weird.
Yeah. So the Tinley Park incident was essentially a situation where many people, like we're talking thousands of people, witnessed apparently something that would be described as like a red, orange lights in a triangle formation in a straight line. Now this weird phenomenon for many took place on August 2004. I think it really spanned like over a month.
Yeah, there was like one big sighting at the beginning of August, and then
Right.
there were a bunch of little sightings that kept cropping up after that, I think.
Yeah, so this wasn't just a one-day wonder.
Hmm.
Many people in Tinley Park and basically every, neighboring area kind of witnessed this all at once. And examples of the ones around it: Orland Park, Frankfurt, Oak Forest,
Mokina.
Mokina, Evergreen Park, and Lake in the Hills as well.
Yeah, now Lake in the Hills is nowhere near those other suburbs. I
Right.
remember we talked about this when we were doing the research. I couldn't figure this one out because the first five suburbs are all like south or southwest of Chicago, whereas Lake in the Hills is like way up in the far northwest suburbs. Like you're almost getting into the border of central Illinois when you start getting out to, Lake in the Hills. I find it very curious that they were seeing this thing close to the same time in Lake in the Hills as when they were seeing it in Tinley Park.
Yeah, and I wouldn't doubt there were probably a lot of sightings like in Chicago too, like in the Lake Michigan area.
You would think, yeah, especially since it seemed to be moving west to east, so it probably went out over the lake at some point.
Yeah, it was seen by thousands, and as we've been watching recently and discovering, there have been over 25 videos, like really clear footage of the same thing. So I mean that adds
Credibility?
yeah, credibility to it.
Yeah, and also the videos came from different angles at the same time, which I thought was
Right.
really cool because you had people in Orland Park and you had people in Oak Forest and you had people in Tinley Park all taking video at the exact same time, so you can actually like triangulate its position and its movement and its size.
Yeah, and it really gave scale to how wide and big this is. I mean, it's a real thing to see, especially just in the footage alone. It was crazy.
Yeah.
Wasn't there one time where people saw like a giant UFO in Chicago or something?
Yeah, there was one over O'Hare Airport.
Okay.
That one was circular though, not triangular, but it was, I think we're talking about roughly the same scale as this one. And we'll get more into that when we talk about expert analysis of it, but this thing was huge. And the one over O'Hare was huge too. The other place that kind of jumped out at me, and again, we're going to talk about other sightings too, but this sighting sounds like a carbon copy of a craft that was seen by Alaskan Airlines, I think it was, or at least it was an airliner in Alaska, and it was flying, I think, from Asia to Alaska, and this thing was like pacing it, and they described it as like this huge triangular craft in the air. So it was that was the first thing I thought of when I started getting deeper into the analysis of this thing.
Yeah, I've definitely heard of like triangular shaped objects in the sky. It's
Yeah.
weird.
And we should also mention there was another mass sighting of the UFO or the lights in Tinley Park, and there's a little debate on when that happened because I know we watched the show UFO Hunters and they said it was October 31st, 2005, which is about a year and 2 months later, but when I read the newspaper articles on it, they were all saying it was October 31, 2004. So I don't quite know which one to believe. But that other sighting's out there, whether it was a year later or a couple months later.
Yeah.
So I mentioned the UFO Hunters TV show, and that's where we got a lot of expert analysis on this, in addition to some of the written materials on it. But UFO Hunters dedicated an entire 45-minute episode to this incident. They called it Invasion, Illinois. And they had a lot of detail. If you ever want to dive deep into this subject, I recommend watching that episode.
Yeah, I got the honor to watch that.
Yeah, I kind of didn't give you a choice. You were in the room and I turned it on.
Yeah, it was good editing though. I gotta admit.
Yeah, and I find that group entertaining, even though the guy with the hat and the sunglasses I always think is a little pretentious, but but in general, it's an interesting crew. So one of the people they talked to, both in the newspaper article and in the UFO show, is a guy named Sam Maranto, who is the director of the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON. He has thoroughly investigated this incident. He was like the first guy on the ground when they realized this was a UFO, and they called him over, and he talked to the witnesses and everything. And he has declared that this is not a hoax. He said, whatever this is, it's not a hoax. So, it's either a natural phenomenon or some government test plane, or it's an alien spacecraft, basically, I think is what he's saying.
Yeah, I mean, he's like the prime detective. Whenever there's a UFO, he's always there, apparently.
Yeah. The local police in Tinley Park were called a lot about this as it was happening. I found it funny, by the way, the first sighting happened during an Ozzy Osbourne concert, or right after an Ozzy Osbourne concert. So there's 5,000 people stuck in traffic looking up at the sky, all seeing this at once.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people would just think, oh yeah, well there's a concert going on. It's there's just a lot of lights.
Yeah, they're just part of the Ozzy Osbourne closing light show or something. 3 big red dots in the sky.
Yeah. Yeah, just shining lights.
Yeah. But the police, when they investigated it, they said it was definitely not balloons or flares, which is important because that's what the government tried to explain it away as, balloons or flares. The FAA offered no explanation whatsoever. They just said it wasn't ours. So
real helpful thing.
Yeah, it wasn't a plane, it wasn't a helicopter, it was no registered flight. Which doesn't surprise me because it wasn't moving right. It was hovering in one spot for a long time, and it was moving agonizingly slowly, and then it just disappeared. So that doesn't really match the flight pattern of any known aircraft, certainly not with the size that it is. And speaking of the size, the UFO Hunters TV show, they went to great lengths to triangulate the position of this thing and figure out its exact length. And at its widest point, they found it to be 1,500 feet across. Now, to give you a sense of scale, one of the biggest jets in use, the 747 jet, is about a little over 200 feet wing to wing, wingtip to wingtip. So that means this is over 6 747s lined up side by side in the sky.
Wow.
Yeah, so needless to say, we don't have anything that big. To the best of my knowledge, to the best of anyone's knowledge publicly, there's no aircraft in commercial use or space travel or military use that even approaches that size. So the UFO Hunters TV show tried to recreate the event using balloons and flares, since that was what the official explanation was. And first they tried building a framework out of PVC, and they weren't even trying to build a 1,500-foot framework. They were trying to do a much smaller scale, like 100 feet or something. And they found that the balloons couldn't lift it. They said it would take literally thousands of balloons to lift even a smaller frame. So they couldn't imagine how many balloons it would take to lift a 1,500-foot frame. So instead, they just kind of loose launched 3 balloons with lights on it in a triangular pattern when it went up.
Yeah, and when I witnessed that, I was just like, why are you even bothering? You're like,
Right.
Just save it for the budget on the show at this point. It's not...
Yeah.
I do wonder why didn't they try using drones to recreate that?
It's a good question. I don't think drones were in mass use.
Oh yeah.
In 2004. I mean, the government had them though. I mean, that's a good possible explanation. I mean, if they happen to have drones that were in a locked flight pattern, so they were constantly flying together. But no, this thing was filmed in 2008, so they probably couldn't even get their hands on drones then to recreate it. But yeah, the way they did it though with the balloons and the flares, I mean, it was obviously not the same thing. They were flying all over the place, and you could see sparks flying off the flares, and they were flickering.
Probably to a lot of the witnesses, they saw like a different color tint Like
Mhm.
I saw, for me anyway, I saw a little bit of like blue and various colors. Meanwhile, the flares were just pure red,
Yeah.
much or just a little bit different.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, the other thing we should probably mention is that this isn't an isolated incident. There were other sightings close to the time that this happened.
Yeah, and apparently just a few days earlier, there were UFO sightings in British Columbia. I'm not sure how many people saw it, but
Not as many as Tinley Park, but there were a few reputable witnesses. And then it seemed to be like moving in a line because after it left British Columbia, it was spotted.
in Minnesota.
Right. Yeah, I think it was over Minneapolis, and it was the same thing. The three red dots, or the three reddish orange dots in
Yeah.
a triangular pattern.
And I don't know. I don't think a balloon would get that far, no matter how powerful, no matter like how high power. It would just pop by then, and it would go too far to be in sight.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then later on, as apparently UFOs were seen in Houston, Texas.
And that was after this event. This was like a day after the Tinley Park sighting, the main sighting. And again, triangular, three lights.
And then after that was Melbourne, Australia.
Now that was an interesting one because it was actually two sets of three triangular lights. So the UFO made a friend.
Yeah, just was traveling through the sky and came across a new friend.
But that could explain how they saw it in Lake in the Hills at the same time they saw it in Tinley Park. Maybe there were two all along.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there was a Tic Tac video or sighting that happened just a few days later.
Yeah.
In November.
The good old Tic Tac.
Yeah.
A Tic Tac video.
Yeah. Now, obviously, the Tic Tac is a completely different shape than a triangle. It could explain maybe one of the points of light if they're able to separate or something. But it's interesting that such a monumentally important UFO sighting happened so close to this UFO sighting.
Yeah, and on that show, it also said that like some sightings were described as like a cigar,
Mm-hmm.
and then sometimes it's described as the normal, like the face of a UFO, the normal shape.
Yeah, there's definitely been different accounts of all these. I think you mentioned when you were talking about this initial sighting, there were a few people who even said that these lights went into a straight line from time to time, but that could also be explained by your angle of viewing.
Yeah, it in a few of the videos, it was in a straight line, but I'm pretty sure that was just because of the angle.
Yeah.
Really, who knows how many of these things could be way up, like in space or whatever. We just can't see it. Like we saw like little dots in the sky that were zigzagging. For all we know, those could have been triangles.
Good point. Yeah, at that distance, you can't really see. I mean, they were lucky. This one was only a few thousand feet above the ground.
Although, one guy said that he had a big telescope, and he described it as an oval up close. So that could have changed. That could explain that it wasn't a triangle. But who knows really what the telescope was? Maybe it was like a cheap one.
Yeah.
You really couldn't see much.
Yeah, one he got in a box of cereal or something.
Yeah.
So we should probably talk about our thoughts on this. I mean, we've talked a little bit about it, but what do you think of the logical explanations? Do either of you think it could be balloons with flares?
Well, I haven't seen the videos, but based on the description, it really doesn't sound like it at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't see it. I don't see it happening.
Hey, what about experimental military aircraft? Do you think they could have something that big and keep it secret, or do you think maybe it could be three military aircraft flying in locked formation that are able to hover and move slowly and move fast and do all that stuff?
My question is, which government are we talking about and why?
Yeah.
I mean, it could very well be like a China or something.
Well, that's another good possibility. I mean, we've recently had that whole incident with the Chinese spy balloon and all those weird UAPs that appeared over the center of the United States that we think may have been spy craft from other countries. Could that be this? If so, I guess my question is, why would you send a 1,500-foot spy craft to another country when you could probably accomplish the same thing with something much smaller and less detectable?
Yeah, and why not just invade the whole planet at that point? Like,
Right.
it's
Now with the military aircraft thing again, I was thinking, some military aircraft, they like fuel in the air. So there's like multiple in the air. I don't know. It sounds like that probably wouldn't be the explanation, but would certainly make it look a lot bigger.
Yeah, that's a good point. Usually, I think when they fuel in the air, they're like one is like slightly below and behind the other one.
Yeah.
So I guess that could create a couple points of the triangle. I don't know if it would be. I still don't think it would be that kind of distance. And they were viewing this thing for, what was it, like 45 minutes, an hour, something like that? Seems like a long time to be refueling.
Yeah, and refueling would probably be like a lot higher altitude too.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think they purposely do refueling at higher altitudes because some of the fuel spills and they don't want it to, like, fall to Earth. They want it to kind of dissipate in the atmosphere before it goes down. Nobody wants jet fuel dumped on their head from 1,000 feet.
Yeah.
Okay, so, I guess the other thing we should talk about is drones. I mean, that kind of relates to military aircraft, and like you talked about, I mean, drones did exist for the military back then. We used them as spy drones. I don't think we were really using them as weapons back then. I don't know. I can't imagine why they would fly them in a triangular formation over Tinley Park for that long. And for that matter, could a drone in 2004 even stay airworthy for that long? 45 minutes to an hour longer.
I don't know. It's questionable because you never know what the government has really.
Yeah.
They're probably like 50 years beyond what we have currently. So.
Good point. Yeah. Okay, so let's take it a step further. Let's say it is a UFO, and and by UFO I don't mean just unidentified, which is the definition of UFO. I mean let's say it's an alien spacecraft. So the question I have is why? Why Tinley Park? Why then? And I did a little bit of research into this, and Tinley Park doesn't have any military bases. There's an army base nearby in Orland Park. There used to be a Nike anti-aircraft missile base nearby, but that had been disassembled years before this incident. So I can't think of why Tinley Park other than its proximity to Chicago and Lake Michigan. But there was a lot going on in 1984. And we should probably talk about some of that as to why a UFO might visit the country or the world in 1984. Big presidential election going on. It was George Bush who won his second term that November. George W. Bush. Earlier that year in January, you had NASA landing 2 spacecraft on Mars. So could it be Martians saying, hey, you landed on our planet, we're going to go visit yours?
Yeah, congratulations, you made it.
Yeah.
So many years we've been waiting.
Yeah. Now, Facebook launched in February of that year. Google did something that year, but they'd actually been launched several years earlier. I think it was just like a major development happened in Google that year. A few months later, in December, there was one of the biggest natural or deadliest natural disasters in history. There was the Indian Ocean tsunami. There was like an underwater earthquake that turned into a tsunami and killed thousands of people.
Wow.
If you want to take the Mothman approach on this, that they were just visiting to warn us about an impending disaster or just coming to take pictures whenever the disaster happened, you could explain the visit that way. The other 2 things I have to throw in there just based on current events. Donald Trump became famous as host of The Apprentice in January of 2004.
What is that about?
Well, it was when he took the jump from just being kind of a background news character to being a household name. And then Elon Musk bought his way into Tesla as an investor in 2004.
Interesting.
So if these are time-traveling aliens and they realize the significance of these 2 events and these 2 people and what they would move on to be later in their lives, then 2004 would be a pretty interesting time to visit this planet.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on whether or not this was a real thing, why it may have happened?
Well, to be honest, no matter what this is, I should say this. I would confirm that this was not just a balloon, but if it were a government flight thing that was huge or a UFO, both of those answers are absolutely crazy and definitely a possibility. And both are just really definitely going to bring headlines if it becomes confirmed in some way.
Yeah, I think so many people saw whatever these things were that it's basically confirmed as far as I know, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think that's irrefutable that there was something there, because this is thousands of people, policemen, healthcare workers, everything. Everybody
Yeah.
saw it.
Yeah, when I say confirm, I mean like maybe the government will acknowledge it like itself, but like it's kind of sad how this sighting was kind of undermined, to be
Yeah.
honest. I mean, I never really thought much about this, even though it's super close to us.
Yeah. Yeah, I had heard, just a few whispers about it over the years. It wasn't
Yeah.
until we started delving into, UFO sightings in Illinois that I kind of stumbled on this, and I was like, wait, how come I've never heard detail on this before?
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel right now. I mean, it's much bigger than many think.
Yeah.
It's weird. It's almost like it's shielded. I don't know if the government is like censoring a lot of the stuff about this or what, but I've never heard about it until recently.
Yeah, I'm tempted to say it's like in Doctor Who, the perception filter, where
Yeah.
you look at something and you're looking right at it, but you can't see it because your mind is telling you it's not there. Because I mean, clearly the information was out there. There were newspaper articles on it. There was this TV show about it. That the information was there, and it was right in like the stream of information that we usually get. So.
Yeah.
The fact that all three of us kind of missed it, it makes me wonder what else we're missing out there.
Yeah, probably a lot of small witnesses out there. But, transition. If you have a UFO sighting of any kind, I mean, we have a encounters form for literally anything paranormal or unusual, so maybe check that out. We'd be very interested to ask you a few questions.
Definitely. And for that matter, if you were one of the witnesses of the Tinley Park lights, we'd love to hear from you as well if you've got more information to add on this. But as always, we thank you all for listening, and we thank you all for subscribing and for sharing our channel with your friends.